Welcome to It's a Good podcast. My name is Hayden.
I'm Chris.
I'm Harry.
And yeah, we're just a bunch of guys having talks about theology, the Bible, and God. And basically our whole goal is just to be accessible to anyone, that you don't need a theology seminary degree to be able to talk about God. We want to make it easy and simple.
I definitely don't have any of those degrees.
Yeah.
That's so true, though. I mean, you just have to be interested in it. All the information's out there.
So it's a good podcast. Virtual quarantine editions continue, and we are going to go topical this week, which is something we have not done in a little bit. I'm in my nerd room. Harry seems to be in his living room, kitchen, and Chris seems to be in bed. So we're all living our best lives right now. So yeah, we wanted to kind of break it up a little bit instead of just like going through Genesis. Try something a little bit different, which is kind of what we started the podcast with, a bunch of topics and just hitting them and seeing what they say as far as the Bible's concerned. So today we are going to talk about miracles. So
tasty subject. That was like, that's so good.
Yeah. So we're talking about miracles. So I mean, I guess the first question we should ask ourselves is, what are miracles as far as like just we understand today? What are miracles?
Yeah. No, I think this actually, that point's going to take us a long period of time to discuss, because I think that you've got like an idea in your head of what a miracle is, and then you might have like some examples in your head of what a miracle is, and then we can look at the actual definition of what a miracle is. I think that that's helpful, like what like the English word miracle is supposed to mean. But then, since we're all tying it back to like a Christ-like viewpoint, like what is a miracle in that sort of perspective. But like when I just like off the top of my head think of like what is a miracle, I think of it as like something that's impossible, like something that happens that I would think is impossible. That's like the very first thing that comes to my mind, I guess.
Yeah. Do you have an example of something that you've heard, or something, that maybe you would say was a miracle as far as someone giving an account of it?
Yeah. That's tough. So, cause like, I think that those two things, they don't completely overlap. Like they're kind of exclusive in some sort of places. Cause like when I think, something that's impossible that like can't happen, the first thing I think about is like dumb stuff. Like I jumped off of a building and I started to fly, stuff like that.
Right.
But then like if you go to somebody's account of a miracle, like it's not, I think, out of the ordinary for you to talk to someone, not just like every person on the street, but be like, hey, have you ever like experienced a miracle in your life? And they'd be like, yeah, like I had someone who, died and then the doctors brought him back to life. Or like, we're probably going to talk about this, like the miracle of childbirth. Like I've experienced that, as firsthand as I can as a male. And like, that is very miraculous in a lot of different ways. So like it, once again, like the first thing that comes to my mind is like a definition for a miracle. I don't think is actually super proper when it comes to, okay, what's like a personal miracle that you've experienced in your life?
Yeah. Fresh haircut, Chris. What do you think about all of this?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what Harry said, that like those are things you typically hear, like has something to do with life or death. I didn't spend too much time thinking about this myself. I actually looked at a definition like right away, which is something I probably shouldn't have done. But I have a definition from the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible, which we can use whenever we want to get there. But typically I think of people being healed. I grew up in the church, so I think of those miracles a lot, whatever Jesus did, which typically is healing or creating something different out of something else. So,
well, and that's a common one too, like healing, but like not just healing, like I had strep throat and then I took some antibiotics and then it went away. It's like healing by like me waving my hand over you or me saying like a prayer and then boom, like you were blind and you can see or whatever. Like, and I think that that's even not as, you know, widely accepted, but still around in today's day and age where they're like, oh yeah, like I just went to bed praying and I woke up and my osteoporosis was gone or whatever it is. Like, I think that that's pretty common still.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think for me, right off the bat, I almost kind of put them in like two different categories. One being like maybe like a secular and then like a Christian category. Like the secular being like something that I just didn't think was possible to happen, and just like by coincidence, so quote unquote, like it came through. Like I had $0 in my bank account. I needed to make rent, and by a miracle, like I fell into $900 and I can pay my rent. You know what I mean? That kind of miracle. But then on the other side of things, I think the other side would be like a direct intervention from God to make something happen. You know what I mean? So things are going on a trajectory, and then usually like I pray about it or, you know, something, and then like bam, something happens that seems like that had to be from God, and we're going in a different trajectory. Go ahead, Harry.
Well, I feel like those two things, like there's some overlap in there too. Cause I'd be interested to hear what the biblical definition is too. Cause like, I remember Hayden, you and I were like walking around the other day, and like, I started looking at the trees, and I'm just looking at them like, oh my gosh, like look at this tree. Like it drinks water and it takes in sunlight and it grows and it makes other trees. And like that in that very moment seemed very miraculous to me, and by design of something far bigger and more important than myself. But like, that's not something that I like specifically prayed for. And, you know, some people would say maybe that's not a miracle. Maybe that's just biology or science or whatever. But like in that moment, I very, very clearly saw it as a miracle. So it's interesting how we've got like the secular idea and then a spiritual idea, but then depending on how you look at things, I guess, depending on your perspective of maybe like a higher power or something supernatural, you know, I think that those can overlap pretty significantly.
Yeah. Chris, do you want to give us that Webster Dictionary definition, or do you have anything else before that as well?
No, I was just thinking what Harry said was really good. So I think sometimes things appear to us miraculous, depending on like our circumstance or how we view the world. But yeah, I mean, I think life in general, when you really start thinking about it, is just insane and miraculous, if that's the word you want to use. But yeah, so the definition I have is from the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible. And let me pull it up. It's a little long, but you know, these things typically are. But it's event which may seem contrary to nature and which signifies an act which God reveals himself to man. The classical definition of miracle assumes that it is contrary to natural law, but this is a misnomer for two reasons. First, many of the miracles of the Bible use nature rather than bypassed it. Second, there no longer is a concept of absolute natural laws, rather a phenomenon which is not readily explainable. Those may reflect laws with which science is not fully in the conversation of. And it goes on for a long time too about scripture being, in scripture, faith is a crucial element of that.
Yeah, I feel like that would be in line with like what I've read, or like something specific in that definition that jumped out to me. It would be like contrary to like nature. But I feel like I have thoughts on that too, because isn't nature itself like a miracle? Like, once again, you know, we talk about nature as if it's like biology or science, as if it's something outside of the miraculous. But I feel like, once again, like those two can overlap.
Yeah. So just looking up the Webster Dictionary definition, it says a surprising and welcome event that is not explicable by law of science or natural law, and is therefore considered to be a work of a divine agency. So yeah, your dictionary definition, the biblical definition, totally just like calls that one out and is like, yeah, this is what usually is said, that it's something outside of scientific natural law, but that usually isn't necessarily the way it's seen in the Bible. So I think where we want to go next is, what does the Bible say is a miracle, or where do we, what category do they fall in the Bible? But where do we think we're kind of landing as far as like a 21st century definition of miracle right now?
I don't know, because I feel like both of the ones that you guys said are like correct-ish, but I do feel like that there is in both of them a distinction between like the natural and then the miraculous, and I feel like if we tile that back, because like the fact that nature exists on this planet at all is like pretty miraculous to me. Like that's where my mind goes. Like the fact that there's oxygen and we're spinning at a certain rate around this flaming ball of fire, like all of that seems pretty miraculous to me when I stop to think about it, and when I look at it from a perspective of like just an ant in an ant farm. So like I think I want to toss out like the natural distinction, and we can talk about that. But I think one thing that maybe is definitely true is miracles seem to have a positive connotation. Like in yours, Hayden, it said like a welcome, and then they're also very surprising. Like they're not expected. So I'm going to stop there, because like I don't even want to go farther than that. Like it's something that is surprising, you like positive. Miracle I don't think is ever really used in a negative connotation. But then something surprising and positive.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, but I think there's people that would disagree with you. There are some people that say the plagues of Egypt are miracles. Mm-hmm. And so they're positive for some people, but they're negative for others. And I guess this is why we need to discuss what our definition is going to be.
Maybe we're kind of stumbling on the key, which is like surprising. Because even, you think about the plagues, 90% of those are what you could consider natural events. But the fact that they are like foretold and then occur right after they're foretold and like in sequence is the surprising part, right? Reasonably, a bunch of frogs could jump out of a river. Like that could happen. A bunch of locusts could fly in there and there would be a swarm of locusts. Like those things could happen. But the surprising nature of it, like, oh, Moses said it was going to happen, and then it happened. And then when he said it was not going to happen, that was when it didn't happen. Like that's the surprising element. So maybe as like a super simple definition, not necessarily the biblical definition, but like our now current definition, which I think kind of encapsulates all the things we were talking about, is like a surprising event that could be possible, but would be very unlikely in the way that it happened.
Well, and I think the important part too is that it's tied back to something divine or something supernatural or whatever you want to talk about. Like, I don't think that it's something that can't, like, I don't think that it's some, well, maybe I'm like contradicting myself, because originally I said like, it's something like, is nature, like, it doesn't have to be outside nature to be a miracle. Right. And now I'm saying it's surprising, and it's surprising because it's possibly perceivably controlled by something divine or super.
Yeah. I think what at least what I think the definitions are trying to get at is natural law, like the way things are supposed to operate, and it's counter to that. Not that it's like doesn't use nature or nature itself isn't surprising, but it's just counter to the way things are supposed to work.
Yeah. Something that's so coincidental that you feel like there has to be a design behind it. Like there has to be intentional purpose behind it, maybe.
But then is nature itself a miracle then?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that definition would leave room for that in the way that you were talking about it, Harry. You're like, wow, okay, so we're on this, we as humans just so happen to live on this earth that has abundant water and abundant oxygen and abundant atmosphere at exactly a distance that's really nice for humans to live on from the sun. And it's spinning at such a weight that we have like good gravity and like the axes, and like, so Like that's all like, whoa, that seems so coincidental that maybe it's actually not just a coincidence. And so I think by that definition, like, yeah, we could say that's a miracle. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it, even in terms of natural law, like looking at our Earth, it just completely goes against that. And you can even look at that just by looking at every other planet that we've ever found. Like nothing else is like Earth. There's just the chance of like having Earth is so like minuscule that it seems miraculous.
Yeah. So I guess what isn't a miracle then? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I think though, if we were going to like bring in like an atheist counterpoint argument person, they'd be like, no, that actually is all in, even though it is like super small chance, like that's kind of the point of like statistics and science, is that statistically it's just going to happen eventually. So no, it's not a miracle. Like that's just the product of the whole deal, the way the universe works.
Well,
And I think, yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was gonna say I think that's just the difference in opinion of what a miracle is. Then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, like maybe that helps our definition too. Like a miracle is something that is not just produced by random chance, you know, and it's something that, you know, I don't know how to say the whole natural law thing. Like it's not as expected. It's surprising.
Yeah. So I think maybe that kind of fits in again with the whole Moses and the plagues example that we brought up, because by random chance, all those things could have happened even in a 10-day span or whatever, like all by random chance. Technically, Egypt could have gotten super, super unlucky and those things could have just happened. However, we introduced Moses, who is declaring that this is going to happen, and then it does happen. And I feel like that's maybe where the miracle lies. So maybe we are kind of falling on the difference between like a 21st century miracle and then like what the Bible would claim as a miracle is kind of the difference of being like a divine agent, bringing it about purposefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say too, like part of the definition that I said, which we don't have to include, but part of the first sentence was signifies an act in which God reveals himself to man. So we don't have to choose that one, but usually when that appears in the Bible, it's God revealing himself to man. Like there's a purpose for it beyond just what it accomplishes in itself.
Yeah. And I think that miracles are tied not exclusively, but probably pretty consistently in the 21st century imagination to something religious, something biblical, which I think is interesting. And like we're talking about biblical miracles, I feel like there's a lot of them. Like a lot of them come to mind, and like we're not even touching on like Jesus's, you know, whatever miracles, but like, you know, walking around Jericho for 7 days and then the walls come tumbling down, like parting a sea, you know, through its middle and being able to walk through it. Like there's a lot of fantastic things that happen in the Bible, and they are actually always a factor of God revealing himself to man in some sort of way.
Yeah, so I think we're starting to touch on a new question, which is in the biblical story, in the biblical frame, why do miracles happen? What would be the purpose behind miracles? You know, it like as if you're creating a religion just to create a religion, you would probably either not include miracles or always include miracles. If you're going to not include miracles, your rationale would be because people aren't going to buy it. Like people don't believe that happened. If you are going to include miracles, the question I guess would be why include them? And so we do see incredibly amazing things happen over and over in the Bible. So the question is, why would they choose to include this? Obviously, one possible answer would be, well, because they happened. But even if they did happen, why would they happen? And, you know, yeah, let's talk about that question.
I think if I was making up a religion, I would include miracles to entice people.
There you go. I thought I was going to be the one to say that. Yeah.
I would have beneficial things that happen for people if they chose to be a part of my religion. But looking at the Bible, that doesn't super line up. I mean, there are some things that definitely happen to help people. I think you probably see more of that in the New Testament, but it's pretty few and far between, like how it benefits like Christians just on their own. But yeah, that'd be, if I was gonna make one up, that'd be that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, to convince people, like for shock and awe value, like no one's gonna read my book unless something crazy happens in it, So that, and once again, like, I think we can kind of cut it into two pieces, that being like the Old Testament, the New Testament, because in the New Testament, like, I can't off the top of my head think of any miracles. Well, I guess I can, but like that are negative though, Jesus's death, I guess, would be the one that would be negative, but then that's still construed in a way that it's very positive for mankind. Like the rest are like, seem to be very positive. In the Old Testament, there's a lot of crazy, wild stuff that happens. That's like, oh my gosh, like that even in our 21st century minds seems absolutely impossible. And it's sometimes damaging, sometimes healing, sometimes just like random, but yeah.
I can think of a couple negative ones in the New Testament, having just gone through the book of Acts. Yeah, we've got Ananias and Sapphira who just get struck dead, it seems, after committing an egregious sin. And then we also see a similar thing happen later in the Bible, because someone's trying to bribe the Holy Spirit, essentially. So yeah, there are some negative ones, but yeah. Why include these? What, as far as the Bible is going, what do you think would be the purpose of including them in the Bible?
Yeah, I think if we're gonna say that they're true and they happened, which is what I believe, I would say the benefit is that it shows that we have a God that likes to be a part of his creation and likes to interact with it, and that and this is the frustrating part, right? It shows that God will interact with the world and do so in ways that help and save people and heal people. But the frustrating part is that these miracles don't always happen, and we're never given a reason why or why not. And so I see that like as a reason why they're in the Bible, but I also see that as a reason like why I wouldn't include them. Like they're frustrating to me.
Yeah, no, they're really frustrating to me, and I guess I hadn't thought about it from this perspective. Like, why are they in there? Like, I am not whatever enough to say that I think that they happened. Like, I just can't say that. I think that some people would say that that's like a measure of faith, to be like, oh yeah, like I believe that each of these things happened. Whether they're going to split the Old or the New Testament up or whatever. They believe that Jesus turned water into wine. Like they believe that Jesus rose somebody from the dead. They believe that Jesus rose from the dead himself after 3 days. Like they believe that those things happen. Like I can't say like I absolutely believe that those things happen. So then if I can't say that, like when you're asking yourself, why are they in there? I think you get to like a pretty troubling place, and I do myself. And that's, I think, why, when I think about miracles, like in the first part of the conversation, it's easier for me to say like, well, isn't everything a miracle? Like, isn't human existence and aren't the trees that how they're growing? Like, isn't that a miracle in and of itself? Rather than confront the troubling reality, like you said, Chris, of like, we've been able to record history pretty well for like 100-ish years now. And we haven't seen a man pray over somebody and then them like jump to life, or in a way that's biblical, in a way that's, obviously God intervening.
Well, I don't know about that. I would say that we don't see that in like our personal American lives, but there's a lot of people in like missionaries in Africa would say that they've seen those things, and they're pretty rare still, and they're not documented in like video form and recorded mostly. And I have heard of those few of those things happening in Haiti too. And I'm not saying 100% they're real. I'm a kind of a skeptic too, But yeah, you don't see things on as grand of scale as you do in the Bible. But I always, something that's been kind of on my heart for the past few years is that when we read like the Old Testament, we usually read this and we go, okay, like this is how life was for people. But actually, like the Old Testament covers thousands of years, and it's very specific, very important people that these things happen to.
Mm.
And a lot of times I like to put myself in the shoes of like Abraham or Isaac or Moses, but like I'm probably more like the no-name character off to the side that might be like experiencing these things around me, but doesn't actively see them all the time.
Yeah. Well, and something too, like for, I guess this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but like if I were to record a miracle happening for posterity's sake, which like, isn't exclusively the reason that the Gospels themselves specifically were written, but if I was going to record it, maybe I, the recorder, did actually believe it happened. But that I'll just leave it there. Like maybe it did happen, but like it wasn't what I thought it was, or maybe it did happen and it was what I thought it was. Like I'm not able to say. It's like, or I, the recorder, didn't know if it happened, knew it didn't happen, or didn't know if it happened. And I think that that's the way more troubling possibility for me when viewing like the Bible, and then like you said, skepticism. Like I am for sure a skeptic. Like if I were to read a written account of a 2020 African missionary who prayed over somebody and then they were immediately healed, I'd immediately discount that. I'd be like, yeah, right. It's just, I think skepticism and random chance, it seems we've created as like the enemies of miracles.
Yeah, I think that's all true. And I think we're kind of getting to a little bit ahead of ourselves, kind of trying to answer the question, like, are miracles real? Are they legit? And I think we want to get to that, but maybe the to answer the question, what is their purpose in the Bible? I think there are several places. So I was listening to my Bible plans this morning, and it was in 2 Kings 4 and 5. And in that, Elisha does just like a myriad of miracles. That was a fun phrase. And like he gives basically like infinite oil to this woman, and then he prophesies that she's going to have a kid. And then the kid like falls and basically dies. And then he rejuvenates the kid. And then he does some other things. And then in the middle of that, at one point, someone comes up to Elijah and says like, it's clear, oh man, that you are a man of God, like that you serve the Lord God of Israel. And I think in that moment, we see one of the reasons, like the why of why there are miracles in the Bible is to give like credibility to, or to like expose who God is. So either like give credibility to a person that God is working through that person because they're doing things that only God could do, or to expose the kind of God that God is, or like to remind. And so that I read those ones. And then I read Luke 7, which was really interesting because it's when John the Baptist's servants come up to Jesus and they ask him, John the Baptist has sent us to you to ask, are you the expected one, or do we look for someone else? And Jesus answers them and says, go and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are risen up, the poor have the gospel preached to them. Blessed is the one who does not take offense at me. So they're like, hey, are you really the Messiah? Are you really the Son of God? And Jesus says, just go tell him what is happening. Tell him about these miracles. And so I feel like Jesus in this moment is saying, what's the purpose of these miracles if not to make it clear who I am? So it was just kind of funny. Like those were my two things that I was reading in the Bible, and they like answered the question twice. of why miracles, at least to me. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I just think that we've talked about the miracle of resurrection before in a much earlier episode, and like first of all, I have to talk about how funny the Elisha one is. Like that's the one where he's like kissing and laying on the boy, and the boy like comes alive. It's like super weird. But then I think that you answer the question in a literary truth. Like, so yes, miracles are in the Bible to lend credence to whatever character is controlling them, behind them, whether that is Elisha or Jesus, or in maybe both of those situations, God, helping them. But I think that this is especially troubling, like resurrection is troubling to me and probably other people out there, where it's like, okay, I understand, from a literary perspective, why these miracles are written down. They're to lend credence. And I feel like a lot of the miracles that Jesus does, call back to certain pieces of the Old Testament and lend a lot of credence to who he is. But then I guess, maybe it's too much me about my life. But then it's like, well, then what are miracles really? Like, are they just literary devices, or do they actually apply to me, to us in this day and age?
I think what you said about the resurrection being tough for you, I think is something that the compilers of the Bible probably knew would be tough for a lot of people, which I'm guessing is why they gave us 4 accounts of it. I just thought that was interesting. Yeah, so when you started talking about like literary devices, it made me think, okay, so maybe looking at them as like the Bible as a whole isn't the right way to do it. Maybe it's looking at books individually and like looking at the point of them in those, which is a ton of work. And you look at something like Genesis, when the whole thing is kind of a miracle. And then you'll have other books like Ezra that might just have like 1 or 2. And they seem like very obvious, like they're there because if they weren't there, there just wouldn't be a story. Like the story is kind of surrounding the miracle. And so, yeah, I think it's probably different and probably intentionally so, but God does big miracles sometimes that affect like an entire people group. And sometimes, he just heals the blind to demonstrate the power of the Holy Spirit. I don't know. I don't know the why. And maybe that's more evidence as to like they're included because they happened, because there doesn't seem to be like a clear thrust of like, hey, this is solving this problem. It's kind of introducing more problems than it's solving.
Yeah. Well, and like, once again, like I feel like I've inverted a lot of the questions we've had. It's like, what is a miracle? It's like, well, what isn't a miracle? Like we're asking, why do miracles happen in the Bible? And once again, the first thing that comes to my mind is like, well, why don't they happen, in the Bible in A, B, or C, or, why do they happen and kill these people, or why don't they happen, today, or why don't I notice them today, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we're kind of getting to the next question again, which I think is good, and we can kind of go there. So they're included in the Bible, and as far as a literary way of looking at it goes, they seem to be included to like give credibility that what's happening isn't just a random chance happening, but in fact it is a work of God. So that seems to be what they're proclaiming in the Bible. So maybe the question is, what would it mean for miracles to happen? And like, are they happening? Like, is it legit to like, should we believe them in the Bible?
Yeah.
One thing I want to just kind of throw in there, it's kind of entering into this topic, but have you guys heard of I'm sure you have, the Jefferson Bible?
Yeah.
So I feel that is the stance that I don't believe any of this happened. And I still like the stories, but Harry's getting up. Does he have one?
I think he does have a Jefferson Bible. So the Jefferson Bible is Thomas Jefferson's version of the Bible, right? where he basically took out all the things that he doesn't seem as plausible, it doesn't see that maybe could have really happened, and left in the rest, right?
Yeah, anything supernatural is just gone.
I might have given it to someone. Like, he literally cut out pages from a Bible and like pasted them together. Just like took out everything that he deemed as supernatural.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to read it just to see how. I honestly think it would be very difficult to read because you would just miss entire plot points.
Yeah.
But the reason I was bringing it up is I think if you did do that, and I haven't read it, but I think if you did do that, you'd be missing, like, I don't know what you'd be left with. It would be very incoherent.
It's so I wouldn't say. I think the answer is yes and no, because I have read it, and it's also like a conglomeration of all four Gospels. So there's a lot of story in it. But yes, it is, as a narrative, less compelling, because it's like straight up just, how is this guy born, or jumping through massive parts of his life. I think it does paint a very compelling picture of a famous person who existed, and how they were, well known and a very good person. Like, he leaves in a lot of the dialogue that Jesus has with people that he did perform miracles on, just not necessarily the miracle itself. And I think that was his point. It was like, I want to model my life after Jesus, but I don't believe in all these supernatural things happening. But I still think he's an amazing person. But yeah, as a, I think that what we're talking about as a literary device, it's like it's probably doing itself a disservice.
Yeah. Sorry, just wanted to bring that up.
No, it's a good thing to bring up, because I think it says, okay, well, what would happen if miracles weren't in the Bible? And I think for me, you would basically not come up with Christianity if miracles aren't in the Bible. I think Thomas Jefferson, though I can respect what he did as a statesman, I feel like I feel like there's no point in following Jesus if he wasn't displaying God-like abilities, because the things that he would have been saying and teaching would be absolutely moronic to believe if you didn't believe that he was God. And I mean, yeah, how many times did he say, like, I'm going to die and then I'm going to come back to life? And without like the actual thing happening, you're like, okay, you're just a psychopath, actually, is what you are.
Yeah, but okay, I'll be the counter to that too, though, because it's like, what if Thomas Jefferson believed that like Jesus didn't actually say those things, and those things were just put in afterwards as literary devices?
See,
like, I think that like, it would be foolish to maybe follow Nelson Mandela. Like, maybe Nelson Mandela thought things that are different than what I think. But I think him as a human being, not necessarily as something divine, which is like what's being removed, but like him as a human being is worth emulating, is worth following. And I think that following Christ and following like the pattern of somebody's life, like those are two very different things. Like I can agree about that. But maybe, and like once again, like me, like all these miracles in the Bible, it's like maybe, and I don't take this stance the hard way, just like I don't take the super faithful stance the other way, but like maybe some people believe like those things did not happen. Like I don't think Jesus said those things. I think he just lived a really good life and then died. So I'm gonna believe those things. I don't think that that's a bad way to look at it, but I don't think that it's consistent with the whole of the Bible. So I'll be a little bit more kind to maybe. Of course, Thomas Jefferson was not a good guy in a lot of ways. So I'll say that too. But I'll be a little bit more kind.
I agree with. Okay, so I agree with like the heart of what you're saying, that you can look at Jesus being nice to people and saying treat people as you want to be treated, and like that's a good rule to live by. But I think if you start picking things out of the Bible, it just falls apart. Like specifically books in general, like the gospel. And I think what you end up doing is if you say, okay, well, I'm going to take the miracles out, and I'm going to take any time Jesus said anything about miracles out, or anytime anybody reported anything about miracles out, like you end up with like this reduction that's basically nothing. And it kind of destroys the heart of the gospel. Not saying that you can't do that. I'm just you can, and obviously has been done, but what you're left with is not really Jesus.
Yeah, well,
Like you're left with a guy that said nice things, which is fine, but it's just I would say that's a different character entirely.
yeah, well, and so I'll agree with you because I actually do completely agree that the Bible needs to be a unified story that leads to Jesus. But I would say, as like a devil's advocate point of view, like, isn't that what I think churches are doing all the time? Because like you pointed out Ezra, like haven't heard very many churches I've been to in the last like 15 years preaching about Ezra or, any other Old Testament prophet. Like they're just preaching on super small parts. So I think
No, you're right. You're right. Absolutely. I mean, we should be taking the whole Bible into consideration. I think both sides of that are really bad. And you do have that a lot. You have people that just only read the Pauline letters and the Gospels, and that is their whole church. Yeah. And they won't ever talk about anything else.
Yeah, I think as far as, so putting it back into the Bible context, part of the central claim, like if you're looking at the Old Testament, one of the main claims is, and we've talked about this before, how it's interacting with its neighbors, is there is a God, and that God is the creator of the world, and he's the one that chose Israel to be his people. And he works in these sorts of ways. This is the kind of God that he is. And then the New Testament comes in and says, oh, and by the way, that God at one point in time in history became a man, did these things, demonstrated his godness in these ways, and then died and rose to a new sort of life. That all happened, and that's who God is, and here's how we should live and what we should do in response to all that truth. So I think taking out the supernatural, quote unquote, of the Bible diminishes the point of what is being said, which is like those are the claims. So let's kind of set aside the Thomas Jefferson Bible for a second and say, like, those are the claims of the Bible. So given that, like, should they be believed? Like, it seems to me that if those are some of the main claims, that miracles are a vital part to be included. If you take out the miracles, you're not claiming anything anymore. You're just claiming that the natural way of the world is what happened. And man, these people got super lucky or unlucky in some other places. But it seems like miracles need to be in the Bible for it to be any sort of claim whatsoever. So given that they're in there and they're making a claim, like, should we believe them?
Yeah, I can touch on the first part of that, because I think that we all do agree that any piece of the Bible that you're reading out of context or on its own you're going to miss the point. So, even if you're reading the four Gospels over and over and over, like if you're reading those without the context of the Old Testament, you're not going to see a full picture of who Jesus is. Like if you read, Revelation, like you're not going to understand exactly what it's saying, and you might understand it to be something else. So I think we can all agree, that and I've even read the Jefferson Bible, and I think it's worth owning if that's all you're going to own and all you're going to read. But I would highly recommend, like, if that's attractive to you, you should just read the whole Bible. But what I cannot answer is the, like, should they be believed? Like, I don't know. Like, I think that they, as a literary device, when looked at as piece of a whole, which is our Bible, I think they communicate quite a bit about who God is as portrayed by the Bible. Like, should they be believed? I don't know. Like, I have hard enough, struggles with, like, resurrection or something dumb like turning water into wine. Not that it's dumb, but like something simpler. And then you get to, like, the biggest miracle of all, like God became a man who was God and was man in the form of Jesus. It's like, that's the only time that's ever happened in history. Like, should you believe it? How can we believe it? Like, I have no strong argument for or against that. Truly, it's hard for me to do.
Yeah, so maybe let's take out the question of, as a person who is an atheist or isn't following Jesus, should we believe that? Let's set that to the side for a moment, because I feel like, yeah, C.S. Lewis in his book Miracles does a fine enough job of arguing why any average person should believe in miracles. But I don't necessarily want to go through that whole thing. And I don't necessarily think that's who we're like talking to right now, on the most part. So if you are out there and you don't believe in God, or don't think miracles are legit, go read C.S. Lewis's book, and take your time, because it'll be a dredge, but it's good. But I think really who we're talking to now is the believer in God, or the Christ follower. And I will say that I have encountered even pastors of churches who don't think a lot of the miracles are legit, who don't think that they, or at least that they didn't happen in the way that it says they happened. So I'll give an example: the feeding of the 5,000. One way that I've heard it taught is that Jesus got up there. He had, the 5 loaves of fish, or the 5 loaves of bread, the 2 fish. He broke them and he gave them out to the people. And the people are like, wow, this guy, he's also not eaten for as long as we have. And man, like, he's just willing to share the food that he has. Well, you know what? Like, I've got some bread here. I'll break it and like pass it around. And the guy's like, oh yeah, I've got a fish here. Like, I'll break it and pass it around. You know what I mean? And so it was like an act of generosity that inspired greater generosity, rather than like, I pull out more bread. I pull out more bread. I pull out more bread, which to me seems to be what the story is actually claiming happened. So given that there are miracles in the Bible and they're portrayed as like a divine, amazing thing, as a Christian or as a God person, like, should we buy it, or like, why buy it?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
I have a really hard time with the question, just because I have different points of views depending on the book of the Bible. And I think when I read a gospel, I take it all in and I say, this is true. And the reason I do that is because the claim that matters the most to me is Jesus being the Son of God, dying and being resurrected. Like, that's crucial to my personal faith. So if I'm going to believe that, I'm not going to start taking parts out of that book. And I know that that's not what everybody believes, and that's fine. That's just like my personal walk. But when I read Jonah and I see that he was swallowed by a fish for 3 days, now I know that ties into the Jesus story, but did that actually have to happen? And does that affect my faith? I don't really know if it actually had to happen. So I could look at that and go, that's interesting. I think that's a good miracle. Could it have happened? Sure. Like, God is all powerful, but did it happen? I don't really know. And like, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not knowing. But when I read like the gospel, it's a lot harder for me to look at any of those miracles and go, I don't believe that.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm able to answer the question, because like, I actually, Hayden, I like super disagree with what you said when it's like, let's not address any atheists or not believers. Let's only talk to Christians with our answer here. And I think that that's like, if you're sending, I understand that like you should communicate 2 different ways, but if we only create a podcast that communicates to one certain group of people, or if we're not saying things that are going to communicate to a certain group of people, I think we're doing like a huge disservice. So like I actually, my answer would be like similar to what Chris said. Like I actually look of like all of the miracles in the Bible, like Chris looks at Jonah. It's like, I don't know. And I feel like I've progressed a long way to like, I'm okay with not knowing. I'm okay with not knowing, but I feel like to know that like even Jesus's miracles were real gives you a new way of looking at life itself, not just the Bible. So I think that that's good. But like, I look at them all like Jonah being swallowed and living in a fish for 3 days. Like I have no idea if those actually happened. Like a lot of things around me would lead me to believe no, but I don't think I would classify myself as like an atheist or a non-believer and even an agnostic saying like, you know, I can't decry, I can't say that they didn't happen, but you know, I just don't know. I just don't know. And I'm comfortable with not knowing, and I'm going to lean into that and read more about it, but you know.
Yeah. I think the reason why I wanted to set aside the 100% skeptic viewpoint is just because I feel like it's a really long rabbit hole to go down, which if that's where we want to go, I'm totally fine with that. It'll just probably mean we're going to do multiple episodes on miracles.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. But yeah, so, I mean, maybe it seems like you guys are both saying that there's room in the Bible to say, maybe this happened, maybe it didn't. Are there any miracles in the Bible that you'd say, if it didn't happen, it would fundamentally change the claim of Christianity?
Yeah. Like, I feel like you brought up like the C.S. Lewis book, like what he calls the grand miracle is like the big one, like Jesus was God incarnate, like Jesus was man. And like that is, when viewed in light of the entire Bible, like that's the bow. Like that's the bow on the story that has happened, you know, in a lot of different ways. And a lot of the things that Jesus says and does lend credence to that idea. But it truly is like the new kingdom. It truly is everything leading up to that point coming to fruition. So like that, I feel like that one, I feel like if we had the Jefferson Bible, but every single miracle was taken out except for that one, I feel like you'd still have something that was worth including. Like if it was, instead of the four gospels, it was the Jefferson Bible, but he didn't take out any of the parts where Jesus like was God incarnate and the Son of God and all that good stuff. And anything tying back to the Old Testament that like reference that, I feel like that would still be worth at least including in the Bible, and it like wouldn't completely throw off the thing. So it's not ideal. Like I think the four gospels are better, but I think that's the big one. Like I think that, and once again, like that's something I struggle with. It's like, if I don't believe that, like why am I reading this freaking book? Like if I don't believe that, like what's the point of, you know, being a part of a Christian following or anything like that? You know, that's my struggle as well. But I think that would be the key one, you know, that to either buy or not buy into.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think maybe then I think that's like a good way to make this hit both like all the things we're trying to do, is to hone in on that miracle. And I think it'll take a second episode because we're already almost to an hour long. So like, yeah, because if Jesus was a God as a man, then, and like let's say we can just agree on that, which is what I think we'll talk about next episode, is what that is. If that did happen, then I feel like the rest of the miracles, at least that he did, you would just say that this is the product of God walking around on human soil. And so then if it happened, like then there's really no question as to whether it could have happened or not. Like if it's God, then like, yeah, fine, it could happen. Like Jesus could have done that because he's God. And then I think that even translates back to the rest of the Old Testament. Like if Jesus could do this because he's God, well, then God could do this through other people because he's God. And so maybe what we should talk about next week is, who is God? How does like he operate in the Bible? And given the grand miracle, as C.S. Lewis would call it, the incarnation, what would that say about the rest of like miracles? And so, well, maybe let's just talk about the incarnation as a thing, and then allow that to inform the rest of the miracles, because I agree, like the hardest one either is the incarnation or the resurrection. But with the resurrection, even like you can say, well, if Jesus was God, that, yeah, sure, he could rise from the dead. He's God. So I feel like the main one is the incarnation. So let's just hone on that, and we can bring in all those perspectives. Like, I don't buy it. Like, I don't believe in God. So like, why believe this miracle, and all those questions.
Yeah. I think that's a super interesting place to go, because that's probably misconceived by everybody, like that a God was man and that man was God, and what does that look like, and how does that happen, and how does somebody believe it? I think that would be a good one to tackle first, and that one would for sure, like, if you believe that one, like, what can't you believe?
Yeah,
right. And I think that addresses the skepticism too, because that's really the crux of the argument. Like, if you're a skeptic and you don't believe in God, then of course you're not going to believe in miracles. Like, none of that matters.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, exactly. That was kind of my point of setting it aside, is like, well, if we're talking about miracles, then the person who doesn't believe in God is already checked out. So, but I think, Harry, you bring up a good point, is like, if we're checking people out, what are we doing? So let's go to the next episode and say, like, why shouldn't you check out on miracles? And let's start with the one that makes the biggest difference, as far as like a worldview perspective would go.
More.
Cool. I like it. All right, next week, be the incarnation. Shout out to Canyon Coffee Roasters for fueling every one of our conversations. If you are only listening, you don't see it, but we are drinking a cup of Canyon every time we talk together. Thanks to John Jones Project and Clink, who are making the music that you hear in the background. Thank you for making awesome stuff that we get to share with the people that are listening to our podcast. And thank you guys for tuning in. And always feel free to let us know if you have questions or things you want to talk about. Or if you want to be on the show, we'd love to have you as well. All right, thanks. We'll see you next time.